All right, this is 14.2, the uses of fresh water. So in this lesson, we're going to talk about how water is used, obviously. 1/3 of all the people on Earth are affected by water shortages. So water is very important because, we need clean, fresh water for many, many things. Number one, for drinking. If you don't have clean, fresh water for drinking water, you can get very sick, diarrheal diseases, lots of different conditions. Parasites, bacterial infections, viral infections. This is why you hear, when you go to Mexico or somewhere else on vacation, if they don't have a really strong water infrastructure, you might hear, don't drink the water. We also need water for growing food, so agriculture, but we also need it for cleanliness, so cleaning clothes, cleaning dishes, washing ourselves. All of these uses of fresh water are very important. And then on top of that, we're going to talk a little bit about industrial uses as well. There we go. All right, so there are three main uses of fresh water, and I've mentioned them. So agricultural, growing our food. Personal, so agricultural is used to grow the apples. Personal, she's using it to wash the apple before she eats it. And then last is industrial. And industrial water is stuff that we don't really think of as much, but industrial water would include the water used at the power plant to cool down the generators in order to maintain the equipment that were being used to produce her electricity. You can see she's got some lights on back there. To run the refrigerator, we use electricity for all these things. Water is often also used in the production of textiles, so in her clothes, in her shirt. Water is also used in the production of all sorts of other things. It looks like we have, just in this picture, some maybe napkins or something up here, which would have been another textile. She's wearing some earrings. When jewelry is made and when metals are made into jewelry caliber metal, you would be using water in that process. So lots of areas in this picture where we're using water in industrial uses. And then, of course, personal includes washing hands, brushing teeth, all sorts of stuff. And, since we're all at home right now because of coronavirus, COVID-19, just make sure you're washing those hands 20 seconds. You can find online lots of good examples of different songs that you can use while you're washing your hands to make sure you do it for the appropriate amount of time. The average American uses 250 liters of fresh water a day for personal. That's bathing, brushing teeth, stuff like that. If you are taking 45-minute showers, you might be using more than someone who is taking very quick showers. Also, things like, leaving the water running while you're brushing your teeth or while you're soaping your hands. Those kind of things can add up into more and more, greater usage for that personal category. Now, most of the water, much that we use in the US anyways, is fresh water or is surface water. So most of that fresh water is surface water. So surface water is either lakes or rivers, and it can be diverted by canals and by dams. Drought and overuse, though, have caused significant surface water depletion. So this is an image of the Aral Sea. So in 1997, all this black area here is the Aral Sea, and you can see that a lot of that area has dried up by the time we get to 2009. The Aral Sea was once the fourth largest body of fresh water worldwide, and it has been dried up mostly because the water was being used for irrigation. In addition to it being times of drought and that overuse happening at the same time, the result is these dramatic changes in how much is available. In the US, a lot of what we're using comes from rivers in some cities or from lakes in others. In Atlanta, we get our water from the Chattahoochee. So most of our water we get from the Chattahoochee. It's processed, of course. We don't just drink it straight from the Chattahoochee. And then it goes back to the river after it has been processed, after it, is used. So that's where ours comes from. Now, 68% of groundwater in the US is used for irrigation. Now, a lot of that is very inefficient. So you see this disparity. We're using surface water for personal use, typically, and groundwater, a lot of that is being used for irrigation. That is being used. The irrigation can be very inefficient. We talked about this at the very intro of this chapter to kind of connect it to agriculture. And depending on where you are, the way you're irrigating can be very inefficient because you're spraying water on a crop. And then if it's very dry, if it's not very humid, if it's hot, all of those things can change the speed of evaporation. If the water evaporates before the plant can take it up, you're losing that water. And so in order to be efficient, what you want to do is you want to prevent as much of that evaporation as possible. Groundwater mining turns groundwater into a non-renewable resource because what we're doing is we're taking it out of the water faster than it is being replaced by trickling through the soil. So every raindrop kind of trickles through the soil, gets down into that aquifer. If we take it out faster than it is replaced, we have this water table that falls. And what can happen is we can have these sinkholes that are caused by the water table falling, and suddenly you have these porous rock that is not filled with water. And when it's not filled with water, it changes how stable that area is. So this is one of the major causes of sinkholes. This is why sinkholes, you tend to be able to predict like what kind of area they're in because of the geology, because of the kind of rock there, and because of how the groundwater is being used there. The other thing that can happen is if we have somewhere near the ocean, so I know my picture is beautiful. Here's the ocean, here's our city. Say we have a well over here, we're taking that groundwater up. Here's our water table, okay? If we dig our well all the way down, we're sucking the water up to the surface. What happens is we can get this cone of depression. We can suck it up too fast. So we end up sucking it up and we get this little like cone area where the water table is falling. What can happen is because of this kind of gap, the well is still pulling water. And so instead of it running dry, what happens is it will actually pull salt water this way. So typically you have kind of a line where you've got salt water over here and fresh water over here under the continent. But if you're pulling that fresh water too quickly, you can pull the salt water in. So your freshwater saltwater split is going to look more like this. And then if your well pulls up salt water, you can't use that. You can't use that for irrigation. You can't use that for drinking. You need specialized facilities in order to be able to use salt water for those things. So this is another big problem, is that undrinkable salt water moving into the aquifer. Now, solutions to freshwater depletion. First, increase supply. So this is where we take salt water and make fresh water from it. This is called desalination. You can see the process in the diagram here. So salty seawater enters, you boil it, and what happens is the water will evaporate. So water vapor evaporates, it exits through this tube, the salt is left behind down here. It doesn't evaporate. Next, the water is cooled and it condenses, and by the time it condenses, it's fresh water now. It's not water vapor anymore. This is a very costly process. You have to put all this heat in. You have to clean the equipment because you get the salt scale there. So you have to do a lot of different things. It's very, very expensive compared to digging a well or taking water from a lake. So places that do desalination are places where they don't have a lot of fresh water, but they have a lot of salt water. Places like Australia, places like near the Middle East. In the Middle East, countries that have more wealth tend to do this more than others. So you might see it in like Oman or Saudi Arabia. Australia is one of the biggest. They've been doing it for the longest. But lots of places do this because they have ready supplies of salt water and enough money to do this process. The other thing you can do is decrease demand. So for agricultural, you can do drip irrigation. You can only grow climate appropriate plants. Some of those other things you guys talked about, you can use soil moisture sensors. You can change how you are growing plants and how you're messing with the soil in order to decrease erosion, which will increase your efficiency of your watering, of your irrigation. In industrial, you can use water conserving processes. So you can recycle the wastewater from one part of your process to cool machinery in another part of the process. So lots of possibilities. And then in personal, there's xeriscaping. Xeriscaping is growing like a native yard. So in some areas, this means letting native grasses grow there instead of like the typical grass, like Kentucky bluegrass. Or what we might be talking about is in places like New Mexico, having your yard, be just desert or rocks or something like that. So sand and rock kind of displays. And then water conservation. And water conservation could mean a couple things. It could mean shorter showers. It could mean better plumbing fixtures that are more water efficient. It could mean changing your habits a little bit. Maybe you don't turn the water off while you brush your teeth and you brush your teeth for the full 2 minutes while the water runs down the sink. It might mean changing how you do dishes. Maybe you have a new dishwasher that is water efficient, and so you don't do dishes by hand anymore. You do all of your dishes in the dishwasher because that saves money. When you go to purchase new appliances that use water, so things like dishwashers, washing machines, that kind of thing, you can look at the Energy Star rating and it'll tell you how much electricity it'll use, how much energy, but it'll also tell you like how much water. So you can get washing machines that will sense how much water they need so that they don't use too much, things like that. So those are kind of your water conservation choices. The other thing you can do personal is you can choose to shop from brands that are environmentally conscious about water. So there are some companies that put the cost of water conservation into their products because they are putting some of that like money from selling the product into water conservation and water recycling projects and things like that. So that's another way that you can like vote with your dollar, so to speak, to make change. All right, I thought that was it, but want to double check. So that's it for uses of fresh water. So the next video will be water pollution on a different day.